This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den.
Welcome back to the Den Husky Warming House Podcast, fans. It is episode number 78 and a jam-packed show for you this week. A little bit shorter of a weekly roundup here, Noah, but some news we will talk about, some women's hockey scheduling updates. We'll also talk about the Kirill Kaprizov countdown. Apparently that's on again, and we're still yet here recording on September 11th here on Saturday. Still no contract signed between the prized Russian forward and the Minnesota Wild. We'll also talk about a hockey moment, Noah, yours and mine, that still aggravates us when somebody brings it up. And then our extra ice session, if you stick around a little bit later, we will talk about our predictions to what the Huskies lineup card might look like. So some player movements who maybe jumps into the roster that maybe wasn't in there, and maybe some guys that might lose a spot here, Noah. So we'll talk about all that and more. But first, as always, we will talk and get started on our Center Ice View News and Notes and our Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup.
Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Starting off things in the Center Ice View News and Notes in the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Kind of quiet this week, but a couple of, some noteworthy items to discuss. First, we'll start in South Florida. Yeah, South Florida. We're talking hockey, right? Florida Panthers, though, coming off of a pretty impressive campaign last season, Noah, and they're apparently trying to keep that momentum going. They're the NHL's first franchise to offer endorsements to college athletes. Another major sports franchise has matched their latest moves. So Panthers are seeking a female athlete from Florida Atlantic University to be the next college student they signed to an endorsement deal. Unable to choose one, they're making more than, 200 offers to try to, keep that namesake going. The NHL team said just past Wednesday, just a couple of days ago, that they will sign any interested and eligible FAU female athlete to a deal under the new rules that allow college players to capitalize on their namesakes, image, and likeness for endorsement opportunities. Noah, the FIU athletes will also be invited to attend Panther games and engage in their social media followers, receiving some team merchandise also in return. I will tell you this, if someone paid me to pay for my tickets to go to a game and just wear merch for free, I don't know how you can turn that down. And for the Florida Panthers, Noah, as you and I both know this, and predictably so, this is going to be a pretty fun team to watch this year coming up too.
Yeah, they have an exciting future, an exciting outlook. This Florida Panthers group does. But I got to be honest, going back, can we get paid for something? Is that
right?
Is that possible?
I'll take free beverages, whatever the case. Whichever way you want to slice it.
I say you find Mr. Maxson at the local watering hole on Friday nights. Yeah. You can repay him kindly. Yes. We're actually into a very short Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. I'm actually the last topics of the day already here. We're going to move over to some league-wide news. We did have a handful of transactions in the NHL to note. In Ottawa, General Manager Pierre Dorion, he was given an extension through the spring of 2025. He's got also an extra team-friendly option that he can extend for another year. He's only overseen one winning season, though. Remember that 2016-17 Conference Cup final double OT run where Chris Kunitz ended ended that pretty quickly. They could have won a Stanley Cup potentially with their boringly defensive style of play that year that frustrated so many fan bases.
Oh, so Montreal this season.
Yeah. Basically, why is it always the Canadian teams that have controversy? Oh yeah, that's right. It
makes it fun. It's Canada. It's no cheese curds on poutine. Apparently that's like, a religious, just knife through the back of Marc-Andre Fleury. But I digress.
Yeah, past the pierogies and maple syrup. Anyway, Dorian, of course, trying to rebuild that Senators pipeline. They are saying technically they say that the rebuild is over and they're going to get back to some winning ways. I don't know where those winning ways ever happened besides maybe 2007. But anyway, I digress. Dorian himself, as a player or as a GM, I should say, ranks third in team history for wins by a general manager of the Sens with 149. He trails John Muckler and Brian Murray in that organization.
First, take that, Pierre McGuire. And two, it is not, that's not an easy organization underneath the ownership of Eugene Melnyk to make that a winning team. But just like the Florida Panthers, who I think are more of a contender than the Senators. Senators are going to be actually a fun young team to watch, I think. I'm not sure what their win-loss record may look like, but I think at least as far as entertainment value, Noah, that team with guys like Tim Stützle, especially one of the rookie fans from last year, their biggest question mark is definitely in nets with Matt Murray, hopefully get return to form. But up front, they have some pretty good, some players to watch in the back end. Thomas Chabot, also one of my favorite defensemen to watch as well, how good he skates and how well he can go up and down the ice, both in the offense and defensive zone.
Yeah, I'd say when you get a goaltender like Matt Murray and Philip Gustafsson is a potential candidate to be a starter on that team, the way Murray has played, you got a question mark on the back end.
Question. That's all right.
But I guess we'll see. Speaking of question marks out east as well in injury news, Pittsburgh Penguins captain Sidney Crosby, he's going to be out for at least 6 weeks with wrist surgery. And Carolina's Jake Gardiner, he's going to be out for the year, long-term injured reserve, back and hip surgery for him. Kind of tough for a guy that his career has been up and down, probably well known for throwing out a couple pizzas to the other team in Game 7 for Toronto a couple years ago. And there's a guy that you would maybe try to hopefully see if he can get back on the high horse. If I'm not mistaken, is he not? He played at Wisconsin, did he not?
I believe so, yeah.
Does that sound right?
Sounds right.
Speaking of college players, we do have another bit of news related to the old WCHA, if I can spit my words out here. Former Mankato Maverick, David Backus, he also signed a one-day contract with St. Louis and has now officially retired as a St. Louis Blue and hung up his skates. 37 years old, 15 plus seasons in the National Hockey League, 561 points in just under 1,000 NHL games. He was a draft pick in 2003. He's also got a couple of silver medals with Team USA 2010, 2014 in the Olympics. The guy that was so close to a Stanley Cup actually against his former team.
I felt so bad for David Backus. Now, granted, I wanted St. Louis to win that cup to get their first one in franchise history. But man, there's players, and maybe this is going to be a list in the future, is players that never got to win a Stanley Cup that maybe should have, right? Like Hall of Famers and whatnot that don't have a cup to their name, because there's plenty out there. And David Backus was to me, especially from his leadership role, and especially when his career was winding down. Noah, I think he took it with grace, and he accepted his role. He never really complained. He was a great off the ice teammate as well, and just sad that after a great storied career, David Backus was never able to hoist Lord Stanley's Cup. Certainly, in my opinion, deserving. Now, is he a Hall of Famer? I'm not quite sure. That could be debated later, but certainly a guy that I thought should have been much closer. And he was with Boston, but that was his last kick at the Stanley Cup can, unfortunately.
Yeah, if it wasn't for his time in Chicago, actually Marian Hossa might have fell into that same boat with the Detroit-Pittsburgh situation in the late 2000s. 2008, 2009 could have been the same exact predicament. We waited a long time to see if he would finally get a crack at a Stanley Cup there. Moving over to Calgary. The Flames, they signed Michael Stone and Eric Branson each to one-year deals. Former Vancouver Canuck Jake Virtanen, he's joined Spartak in the Continental Hockey League after his contract was bought out this July. The 25-year-old was sued for sexual assault 2 months prior. He's tallied exactly 100 points over 6 seasons out there in British Columbia. So still kind of a hairy situation involving Jake Virtanen as well. Lastly, Toronto forward Ilya Mccabe, he asked for a trade at the end of last season, which the Maple Leafs denied. Kind of an interesting little story there. He had a breakout rookie campaign 2 years ago. Wrist injury kind of sidelined him from that, and then he's returned, kind of been relegated to that bottom 6 role. Kyle Dubas, the GM of Toronto, he's kind of made it well known that the 26-year-old Russian, he's going to be part of the team's plans moving forward, and they denied that request. Kind of an interesting move. I guess I understand you wanting to play more, but I mean, what do you do? It's Toronto.
That's the thing. It makes sense from the player's perspective. I think Ilya Mccabe definitely is a guy that has top 6 talent potentially, but that top 6 is locked in for Toronto right now. And again, when you can get a player of his caliber for the value that he has with Toronto, a team that, as we know, is very top heavy and has been blasted for the makeup of that team, there's no question that, and again, when a player requests a trade, Toronto doesn't have to honor that. It's, that's their decision. Now, if other things happen, such as does it not show up at training camp and he really, puts a hard, I don't think he can do that because then he doesn't get paid. But, if these, sort of conversations continue to evolve and maybe get more nasty, there's maybe ways you can force a trade. But at the end of it, I don't think, again, I'm with Dubas there. I don't think you want to, especially with the Leafs. This could be, their last shot with this core, and he might get his wish no matter what if he sticks it out one more year, the way that this train's going there, Noah.
Yeah, he might also end up back in that top 6 role, though. You're missing Joe Thornton. I know Michael Bunting, a couple players have come in, a couple players have left too. He might get a kick at the can here too as well. We'll have to see how he plays under his second full season in the National Hockey League.
And one bit of news that we actually forgot to include here, Noah, is that for the women's St. Cloud hockey games this year, they're not being broadcast on WCHA TV. In fact, they're going to Big Ten Plus.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And there is a rumor. No, I will make sure I make this, big rumor banner right here that, as we know, the men's side of the WCHA has now been shut down permanently, but the women's side is still there. There's some rumors out there that this may be the last season of the women's WCHA, and there could be essentially a women's Big Ten conference that might be coming after this year. Again, these are strictly rumors. The media sometimes, these contracts that sometimes can give an indication of what might go. And the conversation would be would St. Cloud be included in this, or would they join a different conference, or would they form their own? There's some interesting times coming up for St. Louis hockey. Supposedly, we got to get through this season first, but maybe some rumblings of some changes coming up conference-wise for the women's hockey team.
Yeah, speaking of conference-wise, this was actually a section that was going to be in the main portion of the show, but I think it's very fitting here. It's a very quick tidbit about the women's hockey team, so we're just going to hit it right now. Women's hockey as well, they did add an exhibition game to their schedule coming up here at the tail end of this month, September 25th at the Herbrooks National Hockey Center. Women's hockey gets rolling with an exhibition game against a conference opponent, Bemidji State University at home. Again, it's an exhibition game, so it's not going to count for points, but it's going to be a really good tune-up before they have Lindenwood in the following weeks and start to hit that non-conference schedule into a quick conference schedule where I believe Wisconsin is their first WCHA test. So it's going to be a very quick start for the women's hockey team as well. And we wish them obviously the best of luck.
Welcome back to episode number 78. Noah Grant. I am Nick Maxon. Saturday, September 11th, 2021. Real quick before we get into the meat potatoes of the show, I think it is important that we take just a moment to reflect and take a moment of silence as the 20-year anniversary of the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. This is the day of that, and just a very dark time in the history of the U.S. has never been the same since that. So for folks listening to the podcast, we'll take a quick 5 seconds of silence to honor those lives that were not only lost on 9/11, but also those who avenged the United States over the last 20 years as well, fighting overseas. Thank you. And yeah, and speaking, there's no really good transition to this, Noah. And again, first of all, I guess maybe we should ask real quick. Do you remember? I know you must have been just a tear in your mother's eye, but you were 5 when 9/11 happened. Can you maybe enlighten the viewers? Do you even remember what was going on? Were you understanding what was going on? Do you go ahead and tell the listeners?
Yeah, I actually, I remember, I know it was a Tuesday. I didn't know it at the time, but I know now that it was on a Tuesday. I didn't really understand the significance of it, but I do remember it very vividly, actually. And it's interesting to think about, like I'm a December 96 birthday, right? Myself, like my class, I'm high school class of 15. So my class and maybe the class below me are probably the last generation that might actually remember what happened that day. I was 5. I was playing with my Hot Wheels, actually. You know how I do, even to this day, right?
In the morning.
Yeah. But I was hanging out next to the side of the couch and I was playing with my Hot Wheels. My mom, she likes to get up early in the morning. She likes to work out. So Of course, she's got the Nordic track, the old school Nordic track. She brings it in the living room, and she's getting ready to kind of set it up. And she has some workout tapes that she'll throw in there. But before she does that, usually when she turns on the TV, she usually checks, what's going on in the news before I, put the VCR in at that time or whatever it was. Well, she flipped on the news, and it was actually right when the second plane hit the Trade Center when they were doing the coverage. And I remember, she kind of had this audible reaction, and I stopped and turned and watched her. And like I said, I didn't comprehend what exactly all was going on, but it doesn't take much even at 5 years old to understand, a plane exploding into the side of a building as well too. So that's what my memory was. And then of course, obviously as I got older, it continued to, you heard all the conspiracy theories and you heard all the things that, go which ways, but obviously a very dark time in our country's history.
No, I just want to follow up with you quick, Noah, because it's interesting how you're able to remember that this was bad, but were you under the understanding at that point that this was an act of terror, or was it more of like maybe a pilot error? Or I guess do you remember the thoughts you had at that age?
Well, like I remember my mom's reaction, and I guess, I think that kind of influenced my reaction because she obviously, like I said, didn't really see the first plane hit. So at first it was this thought of, there must have been something wrong. But then the news banner goes, there's already been a first plane that hit. When it really started to set in for us was actually, so both my parents are government workers. My mom's a nurse. My dad's a wildlife biologist. My dad was actually sent home right away that day because they wanted all government employees to leave the buildings and stuff after they were kind of in limbo. So that's when it kind of started to sink in, was that, he was able to make a phone call right before the phone lines started to really kind of get bogged down with all the government action that was going on. So it was kind of just quick, hey, I don't know what's going on, but I saw this was going on. And my mom was kind of trying to explain, there's been, some bad people essentially that have been attacking, New York City, and dad was going to come home. And that was kind of what I had processed at the time. So
remember the day very clearly. I was a freshman in high school at Eastview High School. This was second hour. So this was 8:30 in the morning. And this was Mr. Habeck. Now, for those Eastview alumni who hopefully are tuning in, Mr. Habeck, the wrestling coach of Eastview for a number of years, also social studies teacher. We did current events in his, and what he would do is he'd actually get up at like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. He would actually tape ABC's Good Morning America. And of course, back then, for those of you who don't understand how difficult technology was back in the day, you had your old VCR player, and that had to be on like channel 3 or channel 4, channel 5. That was the only time you could play it, right? So he turns on the TV. That was the first thing we did, is we got the class sat down, the bell goes off, and then all of a sudden it's like, let's watch current events. It was maybe a 5-6 minute segment. We would talk about things. And as he's turning on the TV to get to play, the first tower was already hit. And I remember very clearly the conversation at that point it was much different. Early on, it was, okay, at that point, I think they were calling it like a small Cessna, and this was maybe a pilot error. And how could this happen? This is crazy. It was more seen at that point an isolated incident. But as we kept watching it, the TV was just on. And I just remember my social studies teacher, Mr. Habeck, he was just sitting there literally 2 feet from this 32-inch tube TV, hands on his hips, and he's just staring at this. And we were all just glued to it. We just didn't know what was going on. And then live, we watched the second tower get hit. And very clearly, not a small plane, very clearly a jetliner. And then that's when the first time I ever heard the name Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, terrorism, these kind of words I've never heard of before, right?
Yeah.
And then that's when, again, FAA grounds every single aircraft. Then there's reports of 2 other hijackings. And actually, for those who don't remember, that third one that was rumored to be hijacked, and I think it was more of a radio transmission error. I believe it was United or American, like 217 or something like that. Anyway, obviously United 93 had the Minnesotan Tom Bernana, which fought back, and that plane ended up crashing in Pennsylvania. And of course, the other aircraft crashing in the Pentagon. I remember too getting home, and for those who watch like CNN, who watch NBC, those little news tickers, those started because of 9/11. They were not present before that. They didn't need them. It was a way to sort of kind of update continuous information. And they've really never turned back from that day. And that was first introduced back at 9/11. Second thing was, I remember in Minneapolis, they evacuated the IDS tower. For those who maybe don't know it, but it's the big blue tower, hexagon looking thing. They evacuated and shut down the Mall of America. So at that point, we just didn't know when it was going to stop, right? We just wanted to contain everything. Just crazy day. And at 14 years old, I mean, I look back on it then, and, I feel like I was pretty mature for my age. And, I realized pretty quick, even when I got home, that this was an act of war, and was kind of curious as to how we would go from here. It's
amazing for me to think about. I was explaining it to one of the kids that I skate with. He's 16 years old. So obviously I want to say he's like an 04 or something like that, 03, right. 04, something like that. So obviously wasn't alive at the time. And explaining to him that, like, yeah, we were this close to not having a White House or having a big hole through the White House. And I think that's one of the pieces that does get lost in translation is obviously, I mean, I've been to the Twin Towers, the Memorial, and Trade Center 1 or whatever it is now. I've been there twice, and it's a humbling experience. I've been to the Pentagon as well too, gotten to see the memorial there. But to think that, we almost had a burning hole through the White House too, I think that sometimes gets lost in translation as well too. So obviously we have a bunch of memorials up here. We had a gal that passed away that actually ended up getting a new ski lodge in memory of her. And actually a bunch of the firefighters that were in New York at the time and were actually in the building. And then the firefighter groups after came in and actually helped us build the ski lodge. And it's kind of a little memorial up here as well for her too. So I think that you would hope that the country has healed and really kind of learned a lot from that day and continued to, grow and remember those who did lose their lives on that day. But yeah, it's a day to remember, and a very, very sorrowful time when 9/11 comes around, even 20 years later.
Let's go ahead and transition back to hockey here, Noah. But and there's no really good segue for this. But
yeah, I was going to ask. I know we were going to talk about the Kirill Kaprizov thing. I was wondering, can we start with the other topic that we were going to do first? Yeah, I think it's maybe a little more natural one. So
sure. So the one hockey moment that aggravates you that people talk to this day. So we're I think the one for most Minnesota hockey fans that sticks out to them, and not this team speaking in general. Just because I think a lot of folks still follow the North Stars when they became the Dallas Stars. And you talk about the foot possibility creation with Brett Hull in '99 when they won the cup. I definitely watched that.
I like your shirt, by the way.
Thank you. Norm Green still sucks. It's true. That's not my moment, Noah, but I'm curious as to know, and for those listening or tuning in, we did not share our moments with each other. So this is, going to be insightful for even us. Noah, I'm going to kick it out to you first. Which moment, when it's brought up as far as hockey history in the NHL, still just makes your neck turn to the side and gets it all twisted up a bit?
Yeah, this one's very, very clear in my head, and it should be because I'm the one who picked the topic. But
I would hope so.
Nonetheless, Patrick Steffen. Patrick Steffen. I hate how people call him an idiot or that he didn't know what he was doing. If you watch the replay, he goes, and the other thing is too, not that he couldn't have shot on his forehand, but I would say like his actions are trying to make about as darn sure as you can that the puck is going to go into the middle of the net. And the fact that he hit a chunk in the ice, essentially, and it hopped him right when he was making that play. If you've ever played hockey, you know that you can make an incredible play and step through 5 guys and be on a breakaway. And right when you go to shoot a puck, if that puck hits a bump in the ice and gets on edge, that's all it takes for you to not be able to make that play. And it just so happened it was so ill-timed. It drives me nuts, number one, that people think that he's an idiot for that. No, idiotic is when Craig Smith roofed one into the upper deck at Bridgestone Arena in Nashville when he had a wide open net. That's just, one of those things. The other thing is too, regardless of how you thought that was going to go, there was 7 or 8 seconds left in the game. What was the rest of the team doing when Edmonton turned the corner and came back the other direction? Like,
everybody else, right?
Yeah, it was almost a 4-on-1 the other way. And not to say that, you shouldn't have expected him to, not score or something like that. But it's also at the same time, you play till the play is over. So you got to, and even so, even if you have a turnover in that predicament, they're 170 feet away from the other end and they still got burned on that play. So I don't know. It drives me nuts when people still call it, this big blooper, this idiotic play. No, he hit a he hit a patch in the crease.
It's one of those moments in sports where it's like, if 10 things have to go wrong to make it happen, that was that play, right?
Yep.
As you mentioned, and I don't have to explain it, but the puck hits a rut or something, the puck hops over the stick again, happens to be at the right time. And then Ryan Smith goes up to Alish Hemsky, who at the time was probably the best Oiler forward, one-on-one on the goaltender. And he's able to do a nice stretch backhand. And if I remember correctly, Dallas...
they lost that game, didn't they?
I think they won that in a shootout, if I recall.
Was it? No, it's a playoff game, was it not?
No, that was a regular season game.
Oh, okay.
But at the end of it, they still got the 2 points. And I've listened to some of those. They interviewed Patrick Stefan after that, and you could even see from him, his responses where, he looked at it the same way I think you look at it, which is this is just an unbelievably, just insanely awkward, series of events that just happened to culminate in one moment. And obviously.
Yeah, January 4th, 2007. You're right. Yeah, his career actually ended 13 games later.
That crazy. I have one for you, and it's actually quite specific, and it drives me nuts. Let's go back to April 24th, 2016. You probably don't remember this. But this photograph has been shared by a ton because it happens to do with the Dallas Stars as well and your Minnesota Wild. And potentially what many Wild fans consider what should have been a goal was not. It's the Nito Niederreiter right pad save on Kari Lehtinen, and the photograph.
Oh, that was the playoff game where they came back from like 4 goals down in the third.
Correct.
Yeah.
This was the parallax angle goal, right? So the famous picture that gets shared all over social media is front facing to the net, and the zoom in is what looks like the puck over the goal line. Here's the problem. This camera is from center ice on the top of the scoreboard, so the angle is looking this way.
Yeah.
For those folks who really want a fantastic explanation, the Sportsnet, go to YouTube and YouTube literally the parallax angle. And they actually do a live demonstration on this with their own camera. And it's just wonderfully demonstrated. In fact, the actual YouTube videos is actually labeled "How Geometry Created the Illusion of a Flames Goal," because it happened to the Calgary Flames 2004 against the Anaheim Ducks. So at the end of the day, it drives me nuts because they look at that photograph, and I understand it, but the problem is that's from 90 feet away, and it's at an angle that's not over the top.
Yeah,
and yet on this page that I have pulled up here, we have that camera. It's in that top right part of the net, right? And clearly looking straight down at the goal line, and about half the puck is still on the goal line, so no goal, right? But it drives me nuts when people are blaming that on the reason why the Minnesota Wild did not win that game. First of all, in the playoff, you don't go down 4-1.
Yep.
You just don't.
Especially in an elimination game to boot.
Yeah. So, and granted, great theater, great drama. But at the end of the day, that was not a goal. Correctly called on the ice and correctly reviewed, and got the call that should have been no goal. But it just drives me nuts when people look at a camera angle but don't understand or don't realize where that camera is coming from, and how that could maybe give an illusion, as it's so well defined there, that it's not quite as what it seems, right? So that's mine. I don't know if you remember. I'm sure you remember that.
Yeah,
one, right?
No, I was actually, I was working that day, and I was listening to the game on the radio while I was cutting grass, and I listened to the game, the first 2 periods, and there was about 10 minutes left in the second period. And of course it was kind of getting out of hand at that point. And I was like, okay, this is dumb. And I shut it off in my vehicle and drove the 20 minutes home. And when I came back, it was whatever it was, 5-3 or 5-4 and something like that. And I was like, oh, we started watching, and, obviously that one kind of sucked, but I mean, we were kind of out of it, to begin with the way that you put yourself in position in that game. The other 2 ones that I thought were painful as a Minnesota Wild fan, I thought the Jake Allen, where Jake Allen had the most unreal game of his career in game 1 against St. Louis.
Yes.
And the Wild were able to tie it with like 24 seconds left in regulation, but then they lost in OT. The Wild should have won that game 7-0. And I think it would have changed the complexion of that series. They got swept in that series, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Or they went to 5 games that the Minnesota Wild lost that one. And Stanchion Gate having a chance to push the series to game 7 against Chicago when they are in game 6 in overtime and dump in from, I think it was Hjalmarsson, and it goes right up to Stanchion. And of course, Patty Kane comes in, highlight backhander shelf over Brizgalov to knock the Wild out of their only second round appearance since 2003. I mean, it was, and it's kind of crazy to think that was the same run in 2014 when Nino Niederreiter played hero, him and Jared Spurgeon in Colorado, and you had Brizgalov come in halfway through the third for Darcy Kemper. That was a wild ride for Minnesota Wild fans, and crazy to think that we were potentially one goal away from sending that to a game 7 that could have sent us to a conference final for the first time since 2003 as well too. So, but yeah, Minnesota Wild trying to just get to that second round again. We're like the American Toronto Maple Leafs at this point.
Yeah. Speaking of getting to the second round, I think it's a great transition to talk about, again, Kaprizov countdown. And I've got some hot takes on this, Noah.
Yeah. Panic at the XL disco part 86.
Well, a little bit. Yes. We finally do have some panic, and rightfully so now. But I'm actually going to throw some shade a little bit at Bill Guerin right now. And I'm actually also going to throw some shade at, some folks I've seen this, what looks like a screenshot of, I don't know if it looks like a Reddit post. And I think somebody's like, oh, what's our Russian correspondent? And they're saying that on Monday, the 13th, Kaprizov is supposed to fly into the U.S. and sign a 5-year deal with $45 million. I don't buy it. I'm selling it. And here's why.
Wasn't he just at a wedding yesterday?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
But not only that, here's the problem. On August 31st, during the state fair time, Michael Russo kind of announced that this was where things supposedly were trending. Well, hold on. To make a contract, you need term and you need dollar amount. So why the hell wasn't this thing signed, Noah? This is where
would you like to know why? I have an opinion. Go ahead, but
you have an opinion.
Yeah.
Well, and here's where I'm going to throw some shade at Bill Guerin. This is part of that public. To me, it's public posturing. I still don't think they're as close as he's making it seem out to be. I don't. Because if you have the agreement of the term and the dollars, well, that's the only two things you need to sign a goddamn contract. Pardon my French.
Yeah.
So to me, and some can make their, is it a signing bonus thing? Is it this and that? Maybe. But that to me is not the bare bones of why we've had such long and drug out contract situation that we still are in.
Yeah.
And right now the temperature is turned up. So, but I do want to get your thoughts on this. Because I don't buy it. I don't buy that it happens magically on Monday. Two, I don't think they're as close. I don't. I get that some information comes out and as reporters, right, it sounds like good news. So it's like, and I'm not, this is not a shot at Michael Russo at all, because he wouldn't report something unless
he's a credible source. So it sounds pretty,
and I'm sure multiple people, I know how he operates. Multiple people have told him that, right? Now, whether that's been discussed is one thing, which could be why that came about, but agreed upon is completely different. And that's I think where the holdup is. I think the Wild are now really starting to push. I really do think, because Guerin even mentioned himself, it's in a delicate situation. And I think what that means, breaking it down, though, is that he knows the calendar and he knows we're up against the clock now, right? The last thing you want to do is to continue to drag this on. We talked about it. We've talked about it ad nauseum for the last, 8 weeks? And
8 months.
Yeah, right. And last week we had said, if we got to this point last week, if we got to this point now that we're in, and they're still in the contract, and now we have some heat turning up, not only on Bill Guerin, but also on the Kaprizov camp, right?
Yeah,
this is going to get.
Yeah, September 15th is what we kind of had earmarked for the date. Now, I agree with you in some senses, and others, I don't disagree with you. I was listening to, the podcast that Russo and Anthony LaPanta do, Worst Seats in the House.
Worst Seats in the House, yes.
Yeah, very, very good. It was about the 27-minute mark of their last episode that they had talked about it as well. And this is a piece, I think you're right about the accountability portion. Bill Guerin needs to kind of step to the plate, albeit, has to be a little more cautious because he wants the player to sign. Kaprizov himself has to stand up and go to his agent and say, all right, let's get this done. We talked about, like we said, September 15th kind of being that date as well. I think they're a little closer than you give it credit for, though. And one of the points that was made by the pair on the podcast was the same agent as Panarin. Kaprizov has that. So you have that, I don't want to say the Russian mentality, but that the same kind of negotiating strategy, if you will. But more than that, I think when their camp was firmly set and saying, no, we want a 3-year deal, we want a short-term deal, Minnesota finally gets them to back off of that and gets them to that 5-year potential kind of bridge gap. But they're still going to pay him essentially what is an overpay. $9.5 million right now is an overpay for a kid who's played less than 60 games in the National Hockey League. Let's be real. But
from what we've seen, right?
Right, yes. right. He could be a 100-point per season player potentially. We don't know. Or he could fall flat on his face. We don't know. Patrick Stepan, great example. First overall pick, if I'm not mistaken, for Atlanta in 99.
I think so. You're right. Yeah.
But anyhow, I digress. But the piece that I think goes back to, I think that they are set on term and salary. I think the holdup really is contract structure. And one of the points that Michael Russo made was escrow, and the fact that the players are going to have to be paying a good chunk of their salaries for the next 4 or 5 years to try to alleviate some of the revenue loss that has come from this previous season. So I think if you're Kaprizov, I think from what I heard, he wants to get paid a little bit differently. And then they're trying potentially to backload that contract on top of that within regulations that were changed in the CBA due to contracts like Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. So
opposite actually, because Parise and Suter were front loaded.
Right. But the CBA does try to balance it in either direction to where
it's got to be within a percentage. Yeah. Now by backloading it, the idea, and this makes sense. I don't disagree with you there. That is, the idea is at some point the NHL's financial situation is going to improve. Therefore, the escrow would eventually go down, which means he's actually going to take home money, more of that percentage in later years. I get that. Yeah.
The problem right now actually is Kirill Kaprizov. Kirill Kaprizov has to be willing to say, okay, I'm potentially going to make $9.5 million. And again, Michael Russo said this too, or actually Anthony the Panthers said this. You become a distraction even if you miss day one of training camp because of this. At this point, Kaprizov says, I don't care what it has to be. We're almost 2 weeks from training camp exactly, if I'm not mistaken right now. You've got to say, I don't care how it gets done. I need to be in the country. I need to be vaccinated to meet team regulations. I have to have everything taken care of. I need to be on the ice on day one, get the contract done. Kaprizov kind of has to grow a set of stones and do that. We've seen contracts get shifted around in structure. Who was it? The goaltender for Seattle that had not Drieger, the other one, Grubauer. He had to have one of his years adjusted by $250,000 to make sure that he fits to the CBA. I don't care how it happens, make it done. Kaprizov has to put that on his agent because that's what he's paying him money for. That's what his agent job is. He's done the part of giving his client, Kaprizov, the maximum amount of dollar amount potentially that he can get. Don't be fickle over an extra $50,000, $100,000. Get this deal done. Get this kid on the ice. Let's get the ball rolling and let's pop some goals in the back of the net.
And I believe so, Noah, and I think someone might have double checked me on this, and please do, is that I don't think he can leave Russia until he gets it signed because of the work visa.
Yep.
Right. Mm-hmm. So that's part why I said like that whole like screenshot that's floating around from this, Russian thing is BS. That's like, he can't just come to the US, then sign a deal. No, he's got to sign it and then get his butt over here. So it's like, it's flawed from the beginning. It's too ceremonial to me.
Training camp, I think, is 2 weeks from tomorrow. So if you're being, theoretical about this, getting him back, I would say at worst, and I know we keep extending this deadline, end of the week, this week, Friday is like red hot pushing it. Yeah.
And, and again, because of the way that, this game of negotiation chess has been played, right.
Yeah.
And granted, what makes it, I think, harder in this particular situation is Guerin's been a former player, and mind you, a hard-nosed one to, so he's been through this. And more so, and I think it was either Russo or somebody else saying that, Guerin is a player. He had to work for everything that he got. It wasn't just handed to him. So maybe, and obviously this is speculation, but I think the thought was there's a little bit of that mentality where Guerin, he knows something's going to get done, but I think he's also saying, hey man, like this is where I'm at, and I'm not just going to bend over backwards for that. So, but without further ado, Noah, I do agree. Wednesday, I still think is a good, curtain call, if you want to say it. But if we don't see anything but this business week, I think at this point, it's not either or it's now both are on the hot seat in terms of the Minnesota Wild fan base. And at some point, you just got to get this done. And again, the structuring, I get it. I actually don't disagree with that. I get signing bonus could be part of that too, because I don't think that goes into any sort of those other metrics as well. But again, got to get this done. It's time.
Yeah, you've got to get it done. And also, if you're the Minnesota Wild players, again, they talked about this on Russo and LaPanta did in their podcast. Maybe some of the players that Kaprizov leans on, maybe kind of give them a little nudge and say, hey, man, we'd love to have you at camp, put your foot down on this too. But on that same vein, the players have to, at this point, have to kind of almost prepare to be there without Kirill Kaprizov and prepare to do their jobs and get it done. And if he's not there on day one in camp, you got to let it be as minimal as a distraction as it's going to be, because they're going to get questions about it, obviously, and this and that. But right now, the focus is Minnesota Wild hockey without Kirill Kaprizov, and hopefully he's back into the fold. But right now, all you can do as a player, Jared Spurgeon, whoever it is, lead the team and get it done.
100% agreed, Noah. Again, we've been waiting. We've been patient. We've probably, for some of those who are Twins fans, where it's hanky biting time, right? It's
hockey season's around the corner,
right? Exactly, and these are crazy times, and we just hope that in the next, sooner than later, that Kaprizov can be inked to a contract, whatever the case may be, and ideally it's 5 years, and I don't care about the money at this point.
8 years, $13.5 million.
Right,
heard it here first.
Longer than shorter. But with that being said, I think it's time to also move on to our extra ice part of the show here in Noah, and a little bit of a different one. And I think for those of you listening or watching, you're going to like this one. We're going to be predicting our actual Huskies lineup on opening night here, October 2nd, as the Huskies will open up at the Herbush National Hockey Center against St. Thomas in their first ever Division I hockey game. So stick around for that, and we'll see you here in the next extra ice session. And it's the extra ice here session here, Noah. So welcome back in for those who have been tuning in. This is a fun one. I kind of like this because for the Husky squad, what we're going to be doing here for folks is we're going to be predicting our opening lineup, who makes it in, potential line combinations, both offense, defense. I think we can already say, I think we know who's starting in net. I think that's an easy one.
It was about the only easy thing in this entire thing. But.
Right. But it's interesting because as we started to analyze the lineup card, Noah, and, there's there was two starters that were in the lineup, the entire time. That's Jared Cockle, Will Hammer. They've gone into different things. But when we started to really, deep dive into what this might look like, there's actually some question marks that are more than just two positions here. And I kind of want to throw the bucket right at you first. Let's first start on the defensive core for the squad. And I want to start there because there's a lot of depth in this squad on the back end. Enough so where I think you have up to 7 starters. Honestly, if you wanted to rotate 7D in, maybe even 8, right?
Yeah.
Which is, defense wins championships, right? Yeah. You have a Mr. Hockey Award winner, Jack Pearts, that will more than likely see ice time. The question is, is there pairs that you don't touch? Or, if you're Brett Larson, the coaching staff, regardless of what got you there last year, do you try a couple of things? I guess if you're, making this lineup chart, how do you structure this defensive core? Who pairs with who, and maybe who's rotating in and out? Or do we see, guys that didn't see ice time last year that are going to see ice time this year? Maybe vice versa. Is there somebody that may be vulnerable to have a spot taken away from them this upcoming season?
Yeah, well, starting on the back end, like you had mentioned, 5th-year starter David Reniki is going to probably be the starter. LA Kings draft pick, and then Jackson Castor, Joey Lammer are going to push him hard in net there. So there's your goaltending trio, if you will. On the defensive side, you've got 9 players in that core right now on defense. There's only one pairing that I'm not touching right now. That's Nick Burbix, Seamus Donahue. That's your first pairing. You're not going to touch that group, at least as of right now, unless something changes or the wheels fall off the wagon or something like that. Right now, I think that's the only pairing pairing that you leave. Other than that, it's kind of up in the air. Spencer Meyer is going to be in the lineup somewhere. I have him listed right now as a second pairing defenseman. I think that he's earned that spot. He's a captain on this team. He's played well enough consistently. And he's a guy that when I look at him, he's easy to describe him as a 200-foot player, but I almost look at him more as a defensive defenseman. And I think he's been kind of put in that spot where he's kind of had to be an in-between player. Not that he can't provide offense, but he really strikes me more as a more defensive-oriented game. So I think, the question mark is going to be, I have Jack Peart there right now. I could even see Trey Ball slotting into this spot simply because you have the ability to maybe kind of run a more offensive defenseman and have a dynamic top four, if you will. But Peart or Trey Ball, I think, switch maybe in there. Jaycox is the other guy that I have penciled in the top 6 right now. I really like his game. I think he's a consistent player. I think he's a very smart hockey player and a guy that doesn't get a lot of credit for the way he plays the game cerebrally, if you will. You talk about a guy like Jack Peart, who thinks the game very well with a hockey IQ. Jack Peart's a little more offensively upside gifted than Jaycox, but Jaycox plays the game the right way on both ends of the ice. And I think you really saw that flourish during tournament time, NCAA tournament time. And of course, he popped a goal as well too. After that, you've got Josh Ludecki, Brendan Bushy, and Brady Zemer there. I don't know who's that 7th defender if you decide to dress 7 defenders in there. I guess I don't know enough about Josh. Brendan Bushy, I think, is a guy that is similar to Jaycox, plays a really strong defensive game. I think it's really going to come down to who in this defensive core really looks good out of camp. Brady Zemer, good physical presence, good grit, a good guy to throw in. Maybe if you have a tough Friday night, you're looking for a little bit more spark on the back end. Had some discipline issues here and there throughout the season. So I think that's kind of been the knock on him as we saw kind of a younger guy that maybe kind of needs to learn that role, learn the time and a place for those sorts of things. This defensive core is deep. Very, very deep defensive core for St. Cloud State. But I think as we're going to allude to here in a little bit, Nick, the forward group, especially with the question marks surrounding Issa Brodzinski and when he'll actually be ready to go, there are some question marks there as well. But on your side, Mr. Maxon, who do you like for your pairings in this defensive core?
First of all, yes, you don't touch Donahue or Perbix. That to me was the best defensive pairing, I think, in college hockey last year. Sorry, UMass, you're not the state of hockey. But to me, Brendan Bushy is the guy that is, to me, a guy that you can circle and is going to be, I think, one that's on the move as far as up and down the lineup. Spencer Meyer, I have him penciled as that second right defenseman. And I don't see a better opportunity to put in Jack Peart on a pairing than I do with Spencer Meyer. I agree. Spencer Meyer, I think he's underrated a little bit for some of his offense. Mind you, he's been on the power play a little bit on that second unit. He has actually potted a couple of power play goals.
He's got a cannon of a shot.
He does have a good shot. And it was interesting where the knock on Brendan Bushy is a skate. He's a big body defenseman. Was he listed at 6'2", 230? He's a big boy. And that's why that pairing sometimes can be really, really nice. We saw this in the Stanley Cup playoffs with Tampa and a couple other teams where if you had those big trees in the back end, it made life very, very tough for opposing forwards. And that's the thing that, Brett Larson has to really like about Brendan Bushy is that he's a big dude. He plays a very sound defensive style. He's not going to excite you in the offensive style by any means. But sometimes I feel like Brendan Bushy also not as calm with the puck. Sometimes is vulnerable to maybe panicking a little bit. And so if you're going to pair a freshman Mr. Hockey Woodwarder, to me, that's a spot where, especially maybe in a non-conference game, or if you're trying to get him a little bit more experience, you're trying to, fuel by, baptism by fire, if you want to call it. I would put him with Spencer Meyer. I think that'd be a great combination. So I think cerebrally, I think they'd be a great pair.
And that's where you, just to quickly jump in, that's where you talk about Brendan Bushy might easily end up, or somebody below might end up in that spot if Jack Peart maybe needs a little bit more time to adjust. Maybe he becomes a 7th defenseman too. So
correct. And Trey Ball is a guy too that is kind of that mix between Bushy and Peart a bit, where he shows signs that he can kind of be aggressive, especially in the neutral zone. There's a lot of things that he reads very, very well and can disrupt things, especially long stretch passes. He reads plays very, very well coming at him. Again, sometimes offensively, I think he tries to do some things. I remember watching Nick Perbix even a couple years ago. You try to do too much sometimes, where you just either carry the puck and make a turnover at the blue line, that kind of thing. So he's kind of an inconsistent player, but he's still good, right? But he's the guy that can provide you more offense. And then you have Jaycox, just a guy that I think kind of morphed a little bit in the playoffs last year, a little bit more offensive. I guess, I don't know if leash should be the right word, because he's not a little bit, right? But I kind of feel like they let him go with that. I just don't think that Jaycox naturally is a guy that's going to jump in like those face-off plays we scored. I think was against Boston, where I don't think. He had talked about that. Maybe it's a relevant piece, and credit the coaching staff. Maybe the system, as well as the Huskies run, maybe starts to favor guys that are defensive being able to play more of that 200-foot game. Right. And that to me is where, a guy like Brendan Bushy to me is the guy that I've circled to be kind of that seventh defenseman, depending on what look, as you mentioned, you want to go with. I totally agree with you, Brady Zoomer. Now, to clarify, what we mean by discipline is not like being, stupid, more just, there's, as you mentioned, it's more of like you pick a time to step up and make a hit, because again, as a defenseman, if you're going to make the hit, you got to make contact, or you have to at least disrupt the puck, or you got to take the man of the puck. And there were times where, especially early last season, when he was getting some ice time, that he got nothing, right? And that ended up being odd numbers against him. And the thing about Ziemer, though, he's actually a pretty damn good skater. He's got wheels. So, and
for the fans too, if you're ever watching a hockey game, especially if the Huskies are in their defensive zone, watch what's going on away from the puck. Fans may not know this, and especially with a guy like the way Ziemer plays, there's a right time and a wrong time to bury a guy in front of the net. You know what I mean? Like, there's pushing and shoving and cross checks in the back. There's a right time and a wrong time to make plays like that. So again, it's all about picking your moments to create separation and create an advantage, or, push a guy off the puck or push him out of position. There's a lot of things and hacking and whacking and stuff that go on behind the play that a lot of the casual fan doesn't notice, that if you can play on the right side of that line, Brady Ziemer could be that spark plug guy that gets in other teams' heads and frustrates forwards if he can play his cards correctly.
Right. And it's, to take that one step further, no, we're not saying don't do it, but again, it's, do you push a guy a little bit to create separation, or do you, like, is a cross check to the top where the guy falls, that catches the other? If now you're taking a penalty, you're going down shorthanded, right? So it's that line. Right?
So my question for you, Nick, before we move on to the forwards here, who is one guy in this defensive pairing that you look and you say, he needs to find that extra mojo? I need to see a little bit more out of him this year. Is there one guy that you feel like maybe needs to have that breakout season, or maybe kind of needs to elevate his game from last year?
Honestly, to me, it's Trey Ball. And here's why I say Trey Ball. He's got the tools. And I think part of why he wasn't a regular in the lineup, he was kind of that guy in, guy out. Again, sometimes he gets caught on the wrong side of the puck. I kind of feel like, defensively, he's got room to grow as far as his angles, as far as taking away the middle of the ice. There's no question he's got offensive upside. And there's some things that he does really well at reading the play. But I also feel like sometimes he tries to force stuff. Sometimes a defenseman doing less is doing more. And if he can just get more consistency with just settling down and not trying to feel like you got to make like that home run pass every single game, or, trying to win on the first play or the first pass, right? If he can just kind of settle things down, just make that 10-foot pass. And sometimes he's got feet too. Use your feet sometimes. Nick Perbix, it took him a couple of years for him to really feel confident and feel like, if there's no passing lane, just skate it, right? That to me is the guy I want to see most improve, because I think he has the tools to be a next level defenseman. As far as Bushy and Jaycox, this is not a knock on them anyways, but they are who they are. They're defensive defensemen. I just want them to play exactly how they are. Like, just be trees and be tough to get around. That's what they're there for. Ziemer, as a guy that, we want to see a little bit more jump, just growth in terms of the overall IQ of the game, both in terms of structure, but also, as you mentioned, and we talked about the physicality of him too. And then, I guess from that, this is a good problem to have for Brett Larson, honestly, to have this much depth.
Yeah, I was just chuckling how you said that Trey Ball has feet. Hey, Andre, if you're listening, Nick Maxon wants to know you do in fact have feet. So
I think he does. I think he does. I don't think he uses it.
If you look down, you got a left and a right. They're a matching pair. My guy, for me, this might be kind of an off the wall pick. My guy that I'm looking to have to find that extra gear is Spencer Meyer. And the reason I say Spencer is simply because I think defensively, I think he's strong. I think there are a couple of times where when he gets hemmed in his own zone, he starts to run a little bit, but that's almost every hockey player. When you're stuck in your own zone for a long shift, that's just, it's hard to stay disciplined at that point. I think for Spencer, this is an important year, not only for, senior season, but he's potentially playing with either a young guy in Jack Peart or maybe Andre Trey Ball if they slot him up there. He's got to be that kind of glue guy, second pairing guy, third defenseman in that list, if you will, behind Perbix and Donahue in that first pairing. He's got to be the guy that has to be the catalyst in that second pairing, that has to have that poise and veteran confidence and be able to kind of lead with example and find that extra gear that I think he has it in him. I think there's another step to his game that he still has the ability to find. And I don't know how to phrase it any better than that. I don't think there's anything specifically offensively or defensively that he needs to do.
I think it's a confidence issue, honestly.
Exactly. Just kind of being sure of like, you know what, I'm picking up this puck. I'm snapping this puck with my winger. It's going to be a first pass, and just kind of commit to that play. Or, you know what, when in doubt, get it out off the glass. And like you mentioned, just maybe not taking that extra, I guess, half a second to kind of make the play, because man, you're a second pairing defenseman, easily could be a first pairing defenseman if Seamus Donahue wasn't such a good fit with Nick Perbix on one of the best Division I teams in college hockey. You know, play with confidence. You're a captain on this team, and lead those young guys by example and be a mentor for your Jack Pearts, your Andre Trey Balls. Not only in the locker room, he's a great leader, but by the way he plays as well too. I think he's in fifth gear right now. I think he's got a sixth gear that he can get to. I don't know how to phrase it any better than that, but I think we're going to see good things from him this year, and I'm really excited.
I agree with that. I think, and confidence means, you do things quicker, right? It's just taking. Again, we talk about this all the time. I think we talked about this, throughout the playoffs too, is that 1 second gap of a lane to get from the puck to the blue line to the net becomes a half a second. If you see it, you got to rip it, right? You just got to have confidence in yourself and your abilities that you're going to get that shot through. And, don't be afraid to also take an extra step too. If that lane's closing fast, I'm trying to think of, was it Jared Spurgeon? Remember 2014 when was it Nathan McKinnon that slid right past him? He could have shot that shot's blocked, right? He took it, yep. He waited a second and opened things up. You can do that too, right? Where it's like, if you can open your eyes and see the ice and say, okay, I'm dragging it, on my forehand. I'm trying to come from the right boards to the middle. I'm trying to wind up. I think I got a lane, but on the corner of my eye, I see a guy coming in. You can hang onto the puck for another second just to make sure you get it through. And again, chaos in front of the net. The grease pan rolls, from Dave Shayak. Sometimes a shot that isn't the hardest, but just gets through. # Ryan Suter. Sorry. Sometimes that commotion you create, especially in playoff situations, is the best play.
And it's easy for us to say sitting up in the press box, right?
100%.
Obviously, it's much quicker, but I got to be honest. If you're Spencer Meyer, there's only 2 captains in college hockey that brought their team to a national championship game last year, and he was one of them. So there's a lot to be said there. Take that confidence and build on it, and have one heck of a senior season. So
absolutely. So let's move to the forward groups, and I think this is where there are a lot more question marks than we anticipated, honestly, before we really started looking at this. For the sake of our conversation, I want to go with the premise that Easton Brodzinski is ready to play. Okay. And the reason why I say that is from what we know, and granted, we have
So you want me to erase the asterisk here?
Yeah, exactly. From what we know is that he should be ready. The keyword is should, right? From the last update we heard was medically, the leg was healing or healed. He has been skating, that kind of thing. Now, again, this is unconfirmed information, but from the last that we heard is that he should be ready by the season. So let's just assume, just to make us not have to go off in 3 tangents over, because we easily could with this roster. But I do think it's curious that when you take out 2 players' names that were starters, that was Will Hammer moving on to different things, and Jared Cock going to the ECHL. It's easy to say, pluck 2 guys in there and that's it. That's not the case. There's some players here that could move up and down this lineup. And I kind of want to get your thoughts first into what you think this forward group might look like.
Yeah, well, the forward group, the question marks that we're talking about is a surplus of wingers and a question mark in the center depth. That's kind of what it goes through. And I know we've talked extensively, and ESPN talked extensively about the value that Will Hammer brings to the table when they finally were able to see it on the national stage. But the invaluable pieces that he brings is solidifying as a bottom 6 center. He wasn't going to be the guy that was going to be your top 6 or top line centerman. He was the guy that anchored that bottom 6, those bottom, trios of forwards, if you will. And you're kind of missing that right now. You're missing that hard and heavy guy that is that proven guy who's going to slot in there. And Will Hammer, giving uncredit where credit is due. Will Hammer was not that guy until about a year and a half ago and really kind of came into his own and developed into that role. So it's not to say that there isn't a guy that can step up to the plate and make those adjustments and be that new guy. Right now, I got Easton Brodzinski in the lineup. If Easton Brodzinski doesn't go, I have Kyler Kupka on the wing on the third line. I think he just slides up into that first unit there because I want to keep the second line together and then slide Thomas Rocco on and then slide a scratch in there as well. So not really that big of an adjustment. Again, we talked about the clarity of centers right now. It's funny, you and I had kind of gone about, where would you put centers? We liked Sam Hench's a little bit more on the wing, and then we looked at Sam Hench's faceoff success. 141 faceoff wins and 110 losses. Pretty good actually for a guy who, maybe doesn't play center a whole lot, or maybe we thought should move him to the wing. So I've got Kevin Fitzgerald as your leading center. I think he just brings a lot of good veteran presence, a good calmness to his game. He's paired with Easton Brodzinski, and Jami Krannila is a guy that I want to put in there. I like that kind of mix of hockey IQ and buzzsaw mentality between Fitzgerald and Krannila. And then you got two guys in there that are going to be hard and heavy below the dots, and you're feeding a guy like Easton Brodzinski who has a cannon of the shot from any area of the ice. I think that's a good combination as well, too. Second unit, Nolan Walker in the middle with Zach Mccabe and Vietti Miettinen. Kind of a similar style, kind of mixing it up with that balance as well, too. Same thing, Nolan Walker, good cerebral hockey player, likes to get in on the physical forecheck. Zach Mccabe, a serious buzzsaw in this group. And then Vietti Miettinen, more that skill-based kind of third guy high, skill guy, if you will. Third unit, Sam Hench is going to get the center call on there. I've got him down on the third line right now. Micah Miller on the right, Kyler Kupka on the left. And then that fourth group, Joey Molinar, I have him at center right now. I don't know if he's a centerman, but I think he's going to be in the lineup somewhere here, at least to start the season. And then Thomas Rocco, and then maybe Mason Solquist, Chase Brand, one of those two guys in there. And then we've got Ryan Rosborough and then Jack Johnson to finish out in the scratches group there as well. Nick, I just think that bottom six right now leaves a lot of question marks. And because it leaves a lot of question marks, it leaves one or two pieces that maybe have to be moved in the top six. And we could really see a reshuffling early on in the season for the first couple of games. What do you got for us?
So a little bit different look, but, and for those, I think we should disclose a half hour first start record. We looked at the face-off numbers, right? Because to us, we knew that down the middle was sort of the question mark. I just want to go through a couple of things. Jami Krannila, 115 for wins, 183 losses in the face-off dot. Yeah, that's compared to when we talk about Will Hammer's value right now. We talked about throughout the season that he was the trusted face-off man. He was a plus 60. In the faceoff dot, 265 to 205 in the faceoff dot. Then Nolan Walker, 270 to 229, just a little under 50%. And then Fitzgerald, 165 to 124, and Sam Hench's 141 to 110. Now, this is interesting. I have this a little bit differently, and here's why. So I'm actually moving Hench's back to the center position. And here's why. I think that the coaching staff has a decision to make on Sam Hench's. We all know the skill level is there, but as a fourth-year player, I think maybe it's time to accept he's maybe not going to be the goal scorer that maybe we thought we were going to be. And that's tough. That's tough for me to say that, because I do think he could surprise us all still this season, but he has a good start to season, then he just disappears off the score sheet. And with those face-off numbers being the way that they are, I have a really tough time thinking that on the wing, he's going to provide that offense. Right. And he was a guy that I really was wanting more from, especially in the postseason. I just was. And
that's where, I guess on my end, putting him with Kupka and Miller, that could be one of the quickest third lines in college hockey. And, that gives him a chance to maybe kind of lead the charge a little bit, similar to Spencer Meyer on the back end and his pairing, and kind of captain his third unit there.
It's true. So, and I've got a little bit different look, but here we go. So I Brodzinski on the wing, Nolan Walker, and then I'm putting Joe Molinar up there on the right wing. I don't mind that. And here's why. I think Joe Molinar plays a very similar style to Micah Miller. He's not, in terms of, he plays that third guy high. He's that third guy in. He's not at the downhill type guy, but he also, he fought some space during the playoffs. I thought he actually battled pretty good. Yeah. And I think it gives him a little bit more offensive punch than Micah Miller has shown. Again, that's the one knock on Micah Miller. Mind you, there's not many, because I love the way that Micah Miller plays, but I feel like the coaching staff was wanting more from Micah Miller on that top line, where he is the first guy in creating that contact, but more so, I think what they wanted, I think what was missing, and we talked about this before the show, Noah, was getting possession of the puck and then creating offensive opportunities for a Walker and for Easton Brodzinski. I think that's the part was missing.
He's got to produce.
Correct. So that's why I've slotted Molnar up on top there. This is where it gets difficult for me. I still have Fitzgerald in the middle. Because again, face-off wise is good. I think he's as good as a center. I have Sam Henches still on the wing, and then I still kept Chase Brand there. I'm keeping that line together just because they weren't the most offensively gifted, but I really liked the way that Fitzgerald plays defensively. That's the other thing knock on Sam Henches. He can win face-offs, but he's actually not that great in his own zone in terms of defensive coverage. That's the big knock on him there. So that was like, okay. And for Chase Brand, you could honestly interchange him or there to go there. This is the part that's the big one for me. VT Miettinen and moving Krenel off center to the wing. And I think you have to put in as a centerman, and this is a guy that we haven't talked about yet. And this is why it's hard to say this without actually going crazy. I'm losing the name. My gosh, he's actually a freshman from
Ryan
Roseborough from Ontario. Yeah. Here's why I haven't put there. He's 6'3". He's 6'3".
Yep.
The one knock on that line of Krenela, Miettinen, and Mccabe was, guess what? That line was small. And there's one thing that Miettinen didn't really show last year. His big knock was not great in the walls, not great in terms of, winning puck battles if it's in a non-skating situation, right? I think you need a big boy between those three, and I do think you need to keep the flying fins together. That to me was tough, right? Now, the other part, and actually I lied, not Chase Brand in the second line, Zach Mccabe.
Yeah.
Zach Mccabe should be there with Henches and Fitzgerald.
He earned his stripes the second half.
Yes,
of the year.
He did. So
I'll tell you what, and if he's listening, Zach Mccabe, you play the way you did, even in the national championship game, like the buzzsaw player you are.
He's going to have points.
You're going to have one hell of a year.
He's going to have a hell of a year. And then, of course, bottom line, no, you can say bottom, but really this is still a very deep hockey team, right? Kyler Kupka. And then the other center that we got as a transfer from RMU for Robin Morris is Aiden Spolassi. Again, these guys were commitments in July, right? These are late additions. And to me, I have them both in the center position, Noah, because if they go out and acquire two centers and true centers, right, that tells me they're looking the same numbers that we're looking at, which is face-off situations are going to be critical. And I think, again, if you look back at the UMass game and even at times the Mankato game, they were not winning the face-off battle in some parts of those games, especially against UMass. That was a big negative for them in those games.
And I think that's where it's going to be turned. Like I said, I had Molinar in the center position in the fourth unit. Aiden might easily slide in there. And then you've got Molinar that moves to the wing, and Mason Solquist, Thomas Rocco is maybe the kind of the odd man out there as well too. So I think, like we talked about, the question mark's going to come down to center depth.
Right. And then I have Micah Miller down there in that fourth line too. Now, again, this is not a knock on Micah Miller, because I know the fan says, hey, you're taking from the first line, the fourth line. That's a knock on him. I just think the way that Micah Miller plays is just better suited on the fourth line. Now, I've compared Micah Miller before we recorded to a guy Jake Wallen, right? Who's got some offensive flair to him, but he's got more of that speed, run and gun, I'm going to be physical type style. And, God forbid we don't have any major injuries, but he's a guy you can slide up and down the lineup, I think, very easily if things need to change, or if you need a different, more physical look. He's a guy that can be very versatile on this lineup. And then again, the guys who don't, we don't have slotted Jack Johnson, who saw limited time last season. Again, we talked about Thomas Rocco, Trevor Zenz. These are guys that you've got.
Don't forget Trevor Zenz transferred to St. Thomas. So.
Excuse me. Yes. Sorry. Yeah. So I was thinking Mason Solquist. That's who I was thinking. Sorry.
I like how you've alluded to Jake Wallen, though. If there's any consolation for Micah Miller in that comparison, Jake Wallen had a pretty darn good senior year. So.
He did. And, he's a guy that can be that spark plug. And I think Micah has that, he can play the game that way. And I think at times, if maybe the coaching staff would just kind of maybe let him loose a little bit, and just like say, hey, just go and hit, like just maybe simplify it for him, to simplify his job. Maybe that bodes well for him. Either way you look at it here, Noah, this lineup is from front to back, no matter what position you're looking at. This lineup could be stacked. And And again, the biggest question mark we have is down the middle. And again, I've slotted in the two newcomers who are, I think one's a freshman, actually. I think I incorrectly say the other one's a junior, I believe, from RMU. If I looked at that correctly.
I wanted to say it was a senior.
Or was it a senior?
Yeah,
okay, so he's
Aiden,
an upperclassman.
Aiden Spolassi is a senior.
Is a senior. So at the end of it, that experience at the division level, I think puts him as a center with his third or fourth line. But again, I think you need a big body between the Flying Finns, and I just can't separate them just yet. I just like their chemistry together. They both can shoot the puck. And so as a third line, oh my God, right? You've got firepower up and down this lineup in the top 9. And even still, if you go down to that fourth line, you still have guys that can skate, can shoot the puck, and provide an offensive spark. But again, when we go back to Kupka, Wilhammer, and Cockrell, some of their best hockey they played was being a shutdown line against other teams' top offensive opponents.
And that's a piece too, where and again, I'm kind of more of, I'm a big spread the wealth guy. Not to say you can't go back to the Flying Finns, but I also like to see you might find a combination that might be even better than that. The one reason that I have Kupka, Henches, and Miller together, think about this: you've got Sam Henches and Micah Miller, two guys who I think it's no secret they're pretty snake bit, they're pretty starved for some production. But if you can find those guys, you think about a third line in college hockey, really in all of hockey, but college hockey especially, your main goal is to stay even or better. So if you can have that unit be strong enough defensively, play well enough defensively, but then have the transitional speed to create something, they might be a group that defends for 20 seconds, turns the play the other way in quick transition, creates a couple of opportunities, and is buzzing around the offensive zone. Then they're able to change, and the first line comes out for the Huskies, able to continue to establish offensive zone time. And then I think, maybe that's where they find their mojo again and find that offensive input. Maybe Sam Henches and Micah Miller both find that production again. It's no secret. Anytime you're a hockey player, especially when you go to development camps, you're trying to make a team, you're trying to make a roster spot, you can be the most god-awful hockey player in the world in terms of your skill, your speed, whatever it is. But if you pot 20 goals during your training camp, or you have a hot start to the season where you produce, you force a coach to put you back in that lineup with either stellar offensive play or unbelievable defensive play. And I think maybe that's where, if you have those two on the third line, maybe they start to bridge that gap a little bit, find a little bit of defensive structure, and reinvigorate the offensive game with lower minutes.
Now, if it works, it's absolutely correct. The cynic in me, because I'm just naturally cynical.
Defensive liability.
Not just that, but you talk about trying to find the right chemistry. The thing is, we've seen Henches and Mike Miller have multiple different line mates, and at different spots within the lineup, right? And just nothing's clicked yet. And so that to me is where it's like, at some point, does the coach?
It's called the Island of Misfit Toys.
Yeah.
Look it up.
Right. I know. We're living in one anyway. So, but I mean, honestly though, I think a coaching staff at some point has to look at that and say, we've tried different pieces. And I've given Chuck Fletcher all the grief in the world where he had the core, he didn't want to change it. And instead of saying, this ain't going to work, I got to exchange some core pieces now. Maybe the coaching staff, and again, I'm not speaking for the coaches, obviously, but at some point I would think, if I am a coach, do you just accept the player is who he is? And do you instead try to find what's right for the player and make him the focal point? Instead, you just try to find a role based on what you see consistently that maybe isn't to where you think his ceiling is, but just try to find that consistency where he's giving you at least some, an even playing field throughout, the lineup. And that's kind of where, again, it's not a knock on these players, right? This is a very good hockey team. Mm-hmm. And these are great. I think there's a lot of college hockey coaches who would love to be talking about these so-called first world problems, if you want to call it, with this hockey team. These are great problems to have. They are, because you could slot Henches in the top on everyone. You could be a first 2-3. Same with Zach Mccabe. Same with Micah Miller. I would even say for sure, even Kevin Fitzgerald of VT Miattinen could be in that spot, right? You get guys where you can intertwine and tweak, and you're not really changing. I says your outlook from an opponent standpoint is you've got a top 9 set that's going to be incredibly dangerous.
And as a player, let's say Kevin Fitzgerald starts in the first line and goes down to the third line. That doesn't mean that Kevin is bad at hockey. That might just mean that he has great chemistry with his line mates. When you're on a hockey team, and not to say that your fourth line is likely to get less minutes than your first line, but if you're on a really good hockey team, first line, second line, third line, doesn't really matter what quote unquote line you are. You don't really almost have lines in a sense. You have players who have chemistry, you have pairings or trios who have chemistry, and they're producing, and that's all that you care about.
And it becomes, instead of, in the minds of them, and the coaches will tell us you too, it's not 1, 2, 3, it's 1A, 1B, 1C, honestly. Yep. And that's really what the Huskies have here. And really that fourth line, it's really a 2, right? I mean, because again, that fourth line was so good down the stretch. And if recreating that might be the other part that we haven't discussed yet, is can they recreate that shutdown line that really can give that top 9 rest or buy time, as maybe they're not producing offense, or maybe they're just getting forechecked and, they're not getting the puck out of the zone efficiently. You need a line that can go out there and kind of flip the script, right? Where you can really get in and just sort of up muscle and outwork your opponent and really start to try to force the offense the other way. That maybe is something that we should probably take about a couple minutes to discuss, right? Yeah. Do you really think that we can create that same magic? And again, a lot of it was because of Will Hammered in the middle and being so good in the faceoff dot. You could put him in any situation. We saw Brett Larson. We talked about that ad nauseum. But does this roster have the pieces that you can put together for a shutdown fourth line, regardless of their top 9? Can they recreate that this season?
Well, I'll have an answer for you after the first couple of games of the season. And the reason being the transfers and the incoming freshmen, like you mentioned, big body, 6'3". Can they be that player that maybe is going to be that shutdown group? I think that's going to be the question mark. I think the ability is there. The question mark is, do you create that ultra mega shutdown line, if you will, at the expense of offense in the top 6? That's the thing. Is I see guys that would fit in well right now as a good shutdown line, but does it also make your offensive producers or your historically more offensively producing lines a little weaker on the top end as well too? So I think that right now you do, but I'm hesitant to say that because again, I'm a spread the wealth guy. Can you maybe find a little bit of balance where you don't have a truly gifted top line or a truly great defensive third line, but you also have good balance throughout your top 9, if you will. And then you have a fourth line that can keep you in a hockey game as well too. I'm really intrigued. Actually, I really liked your comment about Joey Molinar. I would love to see Joey Molinar get a crack at a top 6 piece too, by the way.
I think he's got the tools to do it.
Yeah, he does. He just says he hasn't had the experience. I think is what it comes down to. Like you mentioned, 1A, 1B, 1C. I'm kind of sad you didn't say 1D. I guess you're not a One Direction fan. I see how it is.
Yeah,
it's fine. It's whatever.
How dare you call me out to that group?
But I guess, I think it's there. Although it just might not look the same as what we've been accustomed to. It's interesting when we look at this roster, and it's so hard every year when you have turnover. I think it's easy to have clarity from the team that we had last year and the team that, went so far. And then you look at the new roster and you're like, ooh, there's some holes to fill. There's this and that. These boys might have chemistry going and buzzing right now in practice. And they might look just fine coming out in their first game against St. Thomas, look good in the Xcel Energy Center ice as well, too. So just a lot of question marks, I think, on top of that. I want to posit the same question to you, Nick, and you can answer your own question on top of that as well, because I think you have that ability. You can handle it.
I hope so.
Who's your guy in the front end, or maybe a pair of guys that you're thinking they got to find that gear again. They got to find that next level.
VT does. Yep. He, when I interviewed Jim Rich, he described it so eloquently. When he was new on the scene and nobody really knew who he was about, he had the free will to have the freedom of space. I don't think it's not a respect to, as a true to the word thing, but, as a player, you earn your respect by your points, right? And his shot, which I think now the league in itself knows who he is. They know his shot. They also know that if you take time and space away from him, he became very invisible. In fact, he was very much a ghost throughout the playoff run in terms of his production. He had a very difficult time because they took the physical game to him, and he's just not a big guy. At least he wasn't a big guy. So he's a guy, you almost want to throw Crandall in there a little bit. I only think that he's in there just because he was on the same line. And I think obviously when somebody that was providing a lot of the shot, Crandall was more the setup guy, you both kind of, take a hit because of that. So it's not necessarily one player versus the next. I think as a duo, as the Flying Thins, they were shut down quite well. So I think both of them are due for a bounce back. I hope Vitti definitely hit the iron and was pumping some iron this year. I also think
and Yami Kranila did that the year before too, came back bigger and stronger, and look how it paid off for him. Yeah.
And he's a guy that I think, it kind of surprised us a little bit. He can play quite a gritty style too, if he chooses to. I think he's better when he doesn't have to, but he's a guy that can, whereas Miettinen did not show that he could. And I think that's the missing piece for the Flying Finns, that they can find, some balance between that finesse with the shot, but also be able to provide some grit when needed, especially along the boards and then behind the opposing net, which is where VT really struggled, especially down the stretch. Down that fourth line, it's hard to disagree with you because there is such a glaring hole at who's going to be that sort of relied upon center to take those faceoffs. And, does Brett Larson look at this roster and say, maybe we don't have that shutdown line that the Islanders have had, or maybe what Eriksson Ek or Greenway and Foligno was for the Wild this past season? Maybe he just sees something completely different. But what is important is, and you described it perfectly, is the balance. Brett Larson likes to run 4 lines. And as we saw, what made them so successful last year was his ability. You didn't have line 1 that was running at 22 minutes and line 4 at maybe 9 or 10. And that was much more close to running, as far as ice time. And I think for Brett Larson in college hockey, if you can do that and roll 4 lines, no matter how it looks or how it operates, that's the key to success, is how you can use those fresh legs and just really grind down and just sort of take your game, which is still skill and speed of St. Cloud, to your opponent. So, it's going to be tough, and we're going to have to wait and see. I agree with you on that. But again, it comes down to just the ability to run 4 lines and to be able to put any light on any situation as fresh legs, and to be able to have confidence that your boys can execute the game plan, whether it's in the offensive zone, the neutral zone, or the defensive zone.
Yeah. As we push an hour and 20 minutes here, I only have one more question, and I want to get my thoughts or input, I should say, on this too. It's going to sound kind of heavy here when I first say it, but I've got 5 guys in the forward group. So I want to slow down. I've got kind of a 1A and 1B. My first here, you've got Sam Henges and Micah Miller. At least one of them has to find a way to have a gear. It doesn't have to be both of them. It'd be amazing if it be both of them. One of those guys has to find that production again. One of the 2 of them has to find it. And then my other 3, Kyler Cooper, Thomas Rocco, and Chase Brand. One, if not 2 of those 3 guys has to make a name for themselves in this lineup this year. Has to find a way to kind of be that guy. I think Kyler Cooper was maybe more that guy. And then maybe Chase Brand at times than Thomas Rocco, but 1 or 2 of those, or all 3 of those guys, I think finally have to kind of grab the bull by the horns and take the reins and find a way to solidify themselves somewhere in this lineup and make a name that they're going to be a player that can be relied upon in this group. They all have the ability to do it. I think they're guys as well too that, again, you talked about the utilitarian approach, can be up and down this lineup. One of them's got to find a way to say, you might move me from the first line to the third line to the fourth line, but darn it, I'm going to be in the lineup and I'm going to be a guy that you can trust in any situation with any minutes and maybe produce a little bit for you on top of that. So that's kind of my thoughts there as well. My last question for you here, Mr. Maxson. We kind of mentioned some newcomers that were in addition to the 3 freshmen that we had. Aiden, how do you pronounce it? Is it
Spolassi?
Spolassi. Sorry, Aiden. Come on the show. We'll hash it out together.
Right.
You've got him, Ryan Roseborough, a freshman as well too, and then of course we've got Mason Sahlquist, Josh Ludetke, and then Jack Peart as well. Yep. With Ryan Roseborough and Aiden, what the heck is your last name? With those 2 guys, of course, Aiden's a senior transfer from Robert Morris. Those 2 guys, in Aiden and Ryan, a little bit later announcements, not really announcements, kind of in the middle to tail end of the summer. Is there something to be read into with that? Do you think this coaching staff finally kind of realized maybe we need a little bit more help up front? How would you explain that to fans who maybe don't understand that? Maybe it's kind of an interesting little signing period for some guys to jump into one of the best programs in college hockey.
Well, let's talk about Spolassi first. I think that's what I'm going with his name, but he's a Robert Morris. His program shut down.
Yeah.
So, as a center depth, and I'm assuming he looked at spots where he wanted to continue his hockey career. Why not jump on the national runner-up, right? I mean, Robert Morris was the host team for Pittsburgh in the Frozen Four and probably had a front row seat to watch this Husky squad. And, I think, you can look at it both ways, really. No, you could look at it as, does the coaching staff look at this and say, hey, you know what? Let's review the stats. Let's review the analytics, and we need some help down the middle. That's possible. Or, hey, you take a guy that's got experience. And mind you, this worked really well for them last year, the transfer portal, and Seamus Donahue and Jared Cockle. These are guys that came in and were immediate benefits and were full season benefits to the squad, were full-time roster players. And is it a roll of the dice a little bit? But as a guy that's got 3 years of college hockey under his belt, that's experience and leadership you just can't take away. So I think Spolassi is a guy that comes in and, maybe does that say something about some of the other players that are what we call maybe fringe players? Maybe. But, as even Bill Guerin says it, is that you want competition. You want guys pushing each other because you make each other better. So to me, you can't look at it as an indictment of other players. But, as a guy with a veteran leadership, you want a team that you can put on the ice and say, this is a team I want to go to the national championship again from a coach's standpoint. And then from John Rosenborough or Josh Rosenborough?
Ryan.
Right. Close enough. I'm so sorry. Right. It was 4 letters. I'm sorry. I think I'm thinking of Josh Rosenbaum, and I'm not even sure that's a real person anyway. So I have no idea. So, but for a guy that coming out of Ontario, he's 21, so he's not a true freshman. He's got some major junior, I think, under his belt. There's some Ontario like minor leagues up to him. He's a big kid at 6'3", but so he's a true center, right? To me, that I think that he's there to try to solidify the fourth line. Honestly, if I look at him, it's either that or the third line. It's going to depend on where he fits. But again, I do look at it as both, that I think the coach staff realized they need to help down the middle, especially in the faceoff dot. Because again, with Hensch's, his faceoff numbers are good, but defensively not great. And I think for a guy that you're looking to spark offensively, you're not going to do that in the center role. You have to keep him on the wing, right? Same thing with Krannila. I think Krannila has got great offensive upside, but I think they're trying to get him out of the middle where his faceoff dots, we mentioned this earlier, were not great. His numbers were not good. So I think it is trying to put players also in the best position to succeed, right? I mean, you look at it as, it's not an indictment that you play bad at center and we want you in the wing, but if your roster is the best when you can put players in a position that they do best at. And I think that's the way I would look at it. And anytime you can get a veteran presence and also a 6'3" center, I mean, you don't say no to that. But I'm curious as to know what your thoughts were on these late additions. And, as we talked to Brett Larson, was it in May, I think, or was it in June? And again in July, these were names that we hadn't heard of, that he hadn't spoken of. And so maybe it was looking around in his roster and thinking, hey, it's competition. Again, you got to earn your spot on this head coach's roster. And, again, competition's never a bad thing.
I think when you look at Ryan, first of all, if you're an incoming freshman, you're tied for the third biggest forward on this team with Sam Henches. And then you've got Micah Miller and Issa Brodzinski is the only guys that are bigger than you in terms of weight. And you're only a freshman. That bodes well for a guy that really could be a solid force down the middle. And we talked about it with Will Hammer a little bit. He didn't come into his own until about a year and a half ago, and him kind of being a healthy scratch and learning to elevate his game and be better really made him a better hockey player in the end, I think. So, even if he's a guy that, maybe they give him a shot on the fourth line and maybe doesn't pan out for him, he continues to elevate. It's not about what Ryan Rosborough does as a freshman. It's about what he does over the course of his collegiate career. And does he get better every night, every game, every practice? But that's a big body. And if you can get him up to speed, if his skating looks okay and he's able to make those plays, I think he's going to be a great addition as well too. And I think if anything, having a little bit of size in this lineup that isn't that big in terms of size bodes well for this group as well too.
And that's where UMass really took it to St. Cloud as well as Duluth in the Frozen Four, no question.
Yep. And then Aiden as well too, being a senior coming from Robert Morris, a little bit on the smaller side, probably a little bit of more of a speedy forward, if you will. I can always use a little bit of speed and skill in that lineup. And we've seen senior transfers and grad transfers for that matter work out very well for the Huskies here in recent years. You talk about Seamus Donahue, Jared Cockrell, guys that have slotted in, and why not use that opportunity if you're St. Cloud to maybe get a couple of transfers that don't have to sit out or have eligibility things and this and that. I think it's a smart move by this coaching staff, if anything, to provide a little bit more of that competition, a little bit of depth. But I think both these guys really do have a chance of being in the lineup, especially as I look more and more with Aiden's game, a little bit of a water bug that maybe if he finds his way can maybe outmuscle Kyler Kupka, Thomas Rocco, Chase Brand, and maybe kind of be another guy that makes a name for himself on a Husky squad for the first time wearing the Cardinal red and black for the Huskies.
Yeah. And again, we won't know until, again, the first 5 games of the season, Noah, those are still kind of a filling out process for any group. And obviously these are important. Well, first, 8 games for non-conference, because they're good. They're against good hockey teams. Again, St. Thomas, first day is, D1, but again, you can never overlook an opponent. I still think they're going to give the Huskies fits. Rico Blasi knows this conference incredibly well, so don't think that they're going into this blind. There's going to be a plan in place to try to stop this Husky squad. That whether they can execute it, what does their roster look like? As far as are they going to have the deer in the headlights mentality, whereas is this going to overwhelm them and they're going to be ready for the challenge? And again, for Trevor Zins, we mentioned that he did transfer to UST, looking for playing time. There's some motivation there. He's going to try and maybe show the coach that, hey, I should have had ice time as a Husky, right? Yeah. And then you get Mankato. Those 2 teams haven't played each other the last 6 months in big competition, right? And then you welcome in Wisconsin.
Minnesota
again,
you
have Minnesota before Wisconsin, and then later on this season you have a home and home against the Bemidji State Beavers. So again, these non-conference, schedule is not an easy one. And again, the pairwise is back this year, right? So this roster, and I suppose any roster this year, is going to have to come together quite quickly. You have to be able to try to find the best roster nice and quick, because that you want to start off. Whether they went 8 of 10 or 7 of 9 in the pod,
7
right?
Of 9.
7 of 9. Yeah. That was a huge momentum, just establishing I guess yourself as a good team and feeling good of yourself coming out of the pod, going into more of that normal schedule we saw this last winter as well into the spring. You don't have that pod again. You don't have that NHL style, but what it felt like as a team to have that momentum, to have that feeling good and have like your roster feels good right now. This is going to be an important stretch for this hockey squad. That is, September 11th, this is 3 weeks away. It starts off quick, and it starts off with a bang, and you can't take anything for granted. So for the coaching staff, for the players, we've said this before and I'll say it again, getting to the runner-up was a fantastic accomplishment, and it was a very tough road to climb. It's going to be twice, if not 3 times as tough to get back to that, because now you have expectations, the target on your back, and you're going to have some changes that, every group, maybe minus the goaltending spot. Can David Rennick, hey, we didn't really spend much time talking about him, but if he can pick right up where he left off, this is not that if he didn't, it's a very dangerous hockey team, but I think if Rennick can be at that same level he was back in April, this team could absolutely see themselves back in Boston for a Frozen Four, if not, again, for another bid for a national championship game.
Yeah, well, we didn't talk about David Rennick because I'm sure someone will talk about him during the year, because that's how that goes, right?
That's how it goes. But,
the pairwise returns, everyone's favorite. Kind of happy that the non-conference schedule is a non-conference schedule. I think it's weird some of the NCHC teams are playing exhibition games against each other. That's just weird. Just setting up the bloodbath for the later rounds, if you will.
And that's great. Honestly, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. Imagine having a non-conference game, with again, whether it's the Gophers every year, I would love to see the home and home state every single year, honestly.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm just saying, like, North Dakota playing Duluth. I'm like, it's weird that it's not like a conference, you know what I mean? Like,
right. Honestly, though, think about it. Those two, think of how good of a game that is. 5 overtime loss for North Dakota, that is great for the players. Are still there. Mind you, they lost a lot of players to NHL contracts this last season, but for the coaching staff, for the players are still there. My goodness, that is still, they want revenge. That's a fantastic scheduling by those 2 squads, honestly, just to kind of get yourself ramped up for the season. Again, every point in every game matters, especially for confidence, just get the team rolling.
And you better believe that the hotels are licking their chops after that one, right?
No
should
question.
Go the distance, right?
Go the distance.
Yeah. Speaking of going the distance, we will have Brett Larson on in a couple of weeks here, Nick. Anything else? I got nothing, man.
No, again, as we get closer to October, this is where the excitement really grows, for not only for you and I, but also for the players. This team is going to be exciting. There's a lot of great battles position wise, both, front, back, and maybe even net too. We still haven't seen this team play. I'm excited to see what St. Thomas can do. Honestly, I think they're going to be a better team than people really give them credit for. And with Rico Blasi behind the bench too, with his recruiting, his knows this conference, I think that team is going to be, as far as in the CCHA is concerned, I think they're poised to make a statement in that league. And at the end of the day, hockey's back, baby. And even more so, we get to see it in person. which is even better.
Yeah.
And we hope that continues and we don't have to, dial it back, as they say, due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Single game tickets still on sale from what I hear. By the way, I don't know if I've ever said this before on the show, but hey, Huskies fans, the season hasn't started yet, but I can already anticipate it. Relax. It's fine. Relax.
and go out
Yes,
and see the Huskies. I can't believe we mentioned this. No, we did earlier, or did we? The Sunday game. I don't remember, honestly. I'm dude.
The Sunday games at the XL.
Yes, Sunday game that was supposed to be in St. Thomas, and I'm not quite sure. Was it supposed to be a Trier rink? I think originally. For that matchup has now been moved to the XL Energy Center, so a primetime spot in an NHL arena. Huskies have had some good luck in NHL arenas as a past, except for one game, which is okay. Go out there and show your support, especially if you're a Twin Cities-based Husky fan. I'm gonna try to myself get out there if I can, because you don't get to play in that type of environment, even as a college hockey player, very often. So go out there, support the Huskies, and again, see a team that's christening themselves in Division I, and see a team try to cement themselves as a true contender again early in the season as the number 2 team preseason rank by Bucci Gras earlier on the season. So go out there and support the Huskies again, October 3rd, 5:00 at the XL Energy Center. And this was just early this week they announced that change for the schedule. So should be an exciting start to the season, Noah. Without further ado, do you have anything else to add before we wrap up for this episode?
As the kids say, go Huskies woo, baby.
Right. Go Huskies woo, as they say, right? Yo, we got to get that woo in, right?
Where's Caleb Peabody when you need him?
He's been all over my Twitter feed. That's where he's been. So, but that will do it, as they say here, for episode number 78. Again, please hit like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Again, follow us on Twitter at the Warming House Den. There for all the greatest content, as well as news and notes for Huskies hockey. And we'll see you back in the next week here, Saturday. We're probably going to start to do Saturdays, I would say, for recording purposes as we go into the season. But we'll see you back here in the Den. And again, thank you for watching and for listening.
One-timer, come in, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL!
Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.